que explicarà el sistema de vot electrònic per fer funcionar els aparells que s'han lliurat a l'arribada.
Gràcies, secretari. Bona tarda a tothom. Bé, els explico aquest nou sistema que avui farem servir per primera vegada.
go first? Yeah, I need to stand up too. I don't want to.
Yes, I don't know. I probably sit.
I don't mind.
It's more comfortable.
That's okay.
We can stand up.
We
if you
can
want.
stand up, yeah.
I prefer standing up.
And me. My students say I can't speak unless I'm standing up. So nowhere for my hands to go.
Bona tarda de nou. Ens trobem una altra vegada en aquesta sala per continuar la sessió que hem començat aquest matí d'aquesta primera jornada de la 9a Biennal Internacional de Paisatge. Aquesta tarda tindrem al començament l'obertura a càrrec de la presidenta de la IFLA, de la International Foundation Landscape Architect, que és la senyora Kathleen Moore. El president també de la IFLA Europe, que és el senyor Tony Williams, i a continuació tancarà aquesta primera part de la tarda, aquesta primera intervenció, grup d'intervencions, el senyor Rafael Narbona, que és el president de l'Associació Espanyola de Paisatgistes. A continuació, continuarem amb la presentació dels treballs finalistes del Premi Rosa Barba i finalment a les 7 de la tarda marxarem cap al Col·legi d'Arquitectes on farem l'acte d'inauguració de l'exposició dels treballs, de tots els treballs presentats al Premi Rosa Barba i també dels treballs presentats al Premi de les Escoles de Paisatge i d'Arquitectura de tot el món. En tot cas, si voleu començar, sisplau, la senyora Kathleen Moore.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you realise this, but there are over 800 people booked on this event. Marina, wherever you are, thank you and your team once again for your exemplary efforts in making this Biennale one of the most significant global celebrations we have of landscape architectural excellence. Thank you. I'm honoured to be part of the jury and to have participated in the whole process over the last few months. And I'd like to thank my colleagues, and in particular James Corner as the chair, for their expertise, time and patience. And of course, it's a great pleasure to be back in Barcelona. We heard last year, at the last Biennale, that at least in some quarters, landscape architecture is regarded as simple cosmetics. Even a cursory glance at the work being presented here demonstrates how way off the mark it is to describe it this way. And things really are changing. There's a real buzz about landscape architecture around the world. And it's clear that it is time to develop a fresh look at landscape, a new philosophy with identity at its core, an innovative approach to design as a critical, artistic and ecological practice, with a holistic view of landscape as the context for the processes of development, whether this informs the design of policy, regional transformation, city master planning, or the creation and management of forests, parks, and squares. And when it comes down to it, what really matters, whatever the kind of discipline we're involved in, is what is the manner in which we practice, not simply the materials we use. And working with the natural processes, given the challenges that we face today, it's an ecological imperative. We have no choice in the matter. But it's the whole thing, the ideas and the values we hold, and their expression in physical form that define us. Several people have said to me that they don't really know anything about IFLA. So just as a summary, very brief summary, we have 76 national members. That's 76 nation states, each with a delegate on the World Council. IFLA is the broadest of broad churches, and it's been a real pleasure to be part of the World Council, meeting with people from all corners of the globe, people, all of them passionate about the future of landscape architecture. Officially, I think we represent about 25,000 members, but the number is more likely to be 35,000, 40,000 across the world. And if you want to become part of this great global organisation, and if you want to find out more about it, become a friend of IFLA. To support us, to connect, share and contribute around the world, go to the webpage, IFLA. Make sure it's not the International Federation of Librarians, but the International Federation of Landscape Architects, and join up and sign up. And if you want to become part of the advisory circle, which will become the IFLA Scientific Committee, please let Marina have your details, because we're lucky enough to have Marina as the chair of the Professional Practice and Policy Committee. As a jury so far, we've been deeply impressed with the diversity of the projects presented. And in June this year, I was asked to discuss the question of diversity within the profession. As landscape architects, we may share common values and ambitions for our discipline. That's what makes us landscape architects. But we all need to recognise that the practice of landscape architecture is very different in Ethiopia than it is in Jordan or Bolivia, or indeed Barcelona. And there's great pressure to develop the education and profession of landscape architecture across the world. So I believe it's time to move away from trying to establish universal standards, because this can too easily become a quest to identify the lowest common denominator. And this is what can reduce the profession to little more than a technical discipline. We should be looking to support and cultivate a diversity of practice. Recognise that landscapes shapes culture, identity, value and quality of life. So to build capacity to truly grow the discipline and the profession, a more expressive and interdisciplinary definition of design and landscape needs to inform the suite of professional and educational documents that we have, so that we can actually set out what is needed to meet the challenges of a rapidly expanding practice. It gives scope for specialism, for diversity, a vision of what landscape architecture might yet become, rather than a snapshot of what it is now. For example, reflecting a cultural, even a generational shift, landscape architects increasingly require a geographic sensibility, a strong sense of social and ethical responsibility, as well as knowledge of the spatial implications of governance, finance, transport, health and education. I was at a conference in the University of Tsinghua, Beijing, a couple of weeks ago, and we had an exhilarating mix of academic, technical, artistic and cultural papers tackling brownfield reclamation from a wide range of perspectives and countries. And the scale of the problem in China is immense, but it's clear that it's also international. Wherever we come from, these issues affect us all in the air, in the water, and in the soil. The conference provided a terrific platform to build and accelerate the discussion, questioning long-held assumptions and many aspects of current practice, and situating the work in the context of challenges such as climate change, food and water security, and ever-increasing urbanisation. It suggested new economic models, new functions for brownfield sites, and even a new aesthetic. It was again evident that landscape creates culture and identity. It was also evident that ecological safety and quality of life are the new currency. This is why we're urging governments, ministers, professional chambers, and universities around the world to properly recognise landscape architectural practice as a discipline in its own right. Recognise what it offers, because then we can respond more effectively to the challenges, threats, and opportunities facing society today. Thank you very much.
senyor Tony Williams, quan vulgui.
Gracias. Thank you. Gorif Margaret Gwif, so I'm gura kun Biennale show in Barcelona. Don't worry, I'm not going to speak Irish the whole time. Hablo un poco español, pero yo no parlo catalán. Los meres disciples. I speak Irish to you, but apologies that I do not speak your language. Language is common. The language of landscape architecture is common to all of us in this room. It's a pleasure to be here on the 9th Biennale in a time of celebration of our tomorrow landscapes, the future landscapes. And what we saw this morning was extremely impressive, and what we'll see this afternoon, probably similar. What does the future hold for a landscape? Is it a fear of climate change, of barriers? Martin Rain talked this morning about borders. We in Ireland have lived with these, with our borders. We've lived with both within and outside of our jurisdiction. It's been a long history of divide, sometimes physical, sometimes spiritual, and sometimes ideological. From the adult to the child, we must break this cycle. We have been working on this for 100 years in Ireland and longer. It takes time to change how we do things. We shouldn't fear independence. We shouldn't fear change. But we are living in a world that is constantly changing. Our borders change, our ideology changes, and our climate changes. We have what I would say is a line of misery that is moving from Africa and Syria and countries like that up through our seas and across our land. And our response, I would have to say, as Europe has been variable, sometimes sad. What can we as landscape architects do about this? We must remember we're human. We must remember that it could be us or our children that are going through this misery or this suffering and misfortune. I'm not a politician, but perhaps I can influence others by my attitude and my actions. Which brings me to the work of landscape architects. We have faced a rapidly changing world of climate change, rising population and urban expansion. The theme of this year's IFLA Europe General Assembly is on the urban theme, futurescapes, and our response to this changing world. How do we respond? I would say that we as a profession are uniquely placed to respond in a very coherent way. We have our profession rooted in science, engineering, architecture, with a fair sprinkle of art. We have to have that sensibility, and our response can be robust and creative. I'm trained as both a scientist and a landscape architect, but I'm also a human and a parent. And I think we're members of very adaptable species. So let's use those unique qualities. Let's build on them. My aspirations for the world are high. My hope for our children and ourselves is that we will use our intellect to think our way through the future and be conscious of the present while and learning from the past. So I wish you well with the Biennale. It's going well so far. I have to leave this evening, but unfortunately can't be here for tomorrow. But the ideas we create must be put into action. And that means we need to be politically engaged. Many of the projects that we saw this morning, be the aspiration or be the actually real, need to be put into practice. In my work, I work as a civil servant. I'm a bureaucrat, but I'm also a designer. So any of my designs, to actually build them, I need to be very aware of contractual environments and also the political environment. So let's not ignore politics. Let's get involved in what ways we can. As IFLA Europe president, it's our aspiration also to form landscape observatories. And this year at our General Assembly, we'll be giving corporate membership to the Observatory of Catalonia. It's a very good example of what we can do. It takes time to build on these things, but it's something that we need to start and something that we need to keep working on. So my hope is that we create landscapes that are for living, that are resilient, that provide us with food, shelter, and beauty, a landscape for all. Gurumaguf, gracias.
Té la paraula el senyor Rafael Narbona, president de l'Associació Espanyola de Paisatgistes.
Buenas tardes. Por supuesto, en primer lugar, agradecer a los organizadores de la Bienal su amable invitación a participar una vez más en este evento, en este acontecimiento, por muchos ya considerado casi el evento más importante en arquitectura del paisaje que se celebra a nivel internacional. Incluido también el prestigio que ya tiene el premio Rosa Barba, quizá el más importante también para un proyecto o para una profesión. Una profesión que también, como comentaba Tony Williams hace un momento, se enfrenta a problemas cada vez más complejos, problemas nuevos, problemas que antes a lo mejor no considerábamos, problemas muchos de ellos y ejemplos que hemos visto a lo largo del día y seguiremos viendo estos días, centrados más a lo mejor en laminación de avenidas, en protección contra catástrofes, en impactos acústicos incluso, además, por supuesto, de lo que habitualmente hemos estado haciendo en la profesión en cuanto a la regeneración de espacios urbanos degradados y demás. Pero estamos como cambiando, porque el mundo está cambiando y quizá seamos la profesión más afectada por el cambio climático, pero para bien, porque nos está haciendo cambiar. Quizá yo creo que es la profesión que más acertadamente y más está cambiando de acuerdo con los nuevos problemas que tenemos. Eso no quiere decir, por supuesto, que vayamos a dejar sin trabajo a los ingenieros hidráulicos o a los ingenieros acústicos, incluso a los arquitectos, cambiándoles las fachadas y las cubiertas por muros y cubiertas verdes. Realmente hay que plantearse, esto exige otra manera de trabajar, otra manera de entendernos. Tenemos que cambiar esa mentalidad que a veces tenemos del trabajo multidisciplinar, que en realidad acaba siendo casi siempre un cajón con un proyecto lleno de separatas y de anejos, por una manera de trabajar mucho más transversal. Tenemos que resolver problemas ahora que quizá ninguno de nosotros por separado puede resolver, pero que además tampoco podemos resolver pasándole una parte a alguien. Es un poco, no sé, lo he dicho alguna vez, casi nunca me sale la primera, pero es como si tuviéramos que resolver problemas, o alguien tuviera que resolver problemas, unos problemas que sabe plantear muy bien, que hasta ahora los ha resuelto porque tiene unas herramientas maravillosas, pero que ahora lo tiene que resolver con otras herramientas que otros conocemos muy bien, pero que nunca hemos aplicado para resolver el problema que tenía que resolver el primero. Es un poco, parece un trabalenguas, pero es así. Podría dar un ejemplo sencillo y que bastante habitual últimamente, como por ejemplo hemos visto también cuestiones de inundaciones. Surge bastante a menudo y más en nuestra cuenca mediterránea. Tenemos problemas de inundaciones, problemas de periodos de tormentas cada vez más recurrentes, cada vez más raros, además fuera de lugar, y que todos sabemos que hay una manera de resolverlos. Hay gente que conoce perfectamente y puede calcular los periodos de retorno a 10, 20, 50 años, los que haga falta, y tiene unas herramientas que, conocido el caudal, la velocidad, la pendiente, la rugosidad de los materiales, todas esas cosas puede resolver el problema perfectamente, o hasta ahora parecía que podía resolverlo perfectamente. Si le decimos que a lo mejor se puede resolver de otra manera, permeabilizando, con cubiertas verdes, con rain gardens, con un montón de herramientas que hay, ya la cosa empieza a estar un poco más complicada, porque ya no es que le pasemos nosotros qué especies tiene que poner, sino que él tenía muy claro y muy bien tabulado sus fórmulas, y que si el diámetro del colector será la raíz cuadrada del caudal por la velocidad y no sé cuántas cosas más. No sé si hay fórmulas de Manning para esas cosas, pero para las cubiertas verdes o para esas otras cosas no. Y hay que trabajar, hay que hacer una especie de simbiosis. No es que queremos hacer las cosas, tenemos que crear unas nuevas especies, a lo mejor combinando el ADN de unos y de otros, el ADN, por supuesto, profesional, un poco como la película de la mosca, ¿no? Hay que crear una especie de nueva capacidad de resolver los problemas como profesionales. Es complejo, es difícil, pero no creo que sea el problema más difícil, porque eso implica también cambios de mentalidad y de manera de trabajar en las administraciones a todos los niveles. Por ejemplo, en la administración local ya no vale el que llega un proyecto y cada servicio informa de su trocito, porque los proyectos van a llegar de otra manera, más complejos. Hay problemas también graves, o yo los considero muy importantes, como por ejemplo puedan ser las cuestiones legales. Es decir, el ejemplo que yo he puesto antes, pues podemos encontrar profesionales dispuestos a aprobar. Vale, pero ¿qué pasa si luego el periodo de retorno no es como el que pensábamos o se reproduce la inundación? ¿Qué hace el juez? ¿O qué hace el ingeniero de la Confederación que tiene que aprobar ese proyecto? Porque al juez le pueden llevar unas fórmulas, unas tablas y demostrarle que ha sido un problema de cálculo o no, que ha sido una catástrofe natural. Pero si lo hemos resuelto con cubiertas, con terrazas, con permeabilizaciones, con lagunas de laminación, es un problema muy complejo, porque hay gente que tiene que poner su firma y jueces que tienen que decidir. Y otro problema, a lo mejor a nivel europeo, eso lo conoce muy bien Tony Williams, que tampoco tienen muy claro cómo resolver estas cuestiones. Si queremos hacer una depuradora, pues probablemente mandamos nuestro proyecto a los programas de FEDER, del Fondo Regional, y igual no lo financian. Si queremos recuperar unas antiguas graveras o incluso una zona lacustre y recuperar lo que sería una zona húmeda o algo así, pues podemos enviar un programa LIFE que seguro que no lo resuelven y probablemente no lo financien. Pero si una administración quisiera a lo mejor depurar sus aguas por lagunajes, aprovechando la proximidad de un río, con fitodepuración, y enviamos el proyecto a Bruselas, ¿dónde va? ¿Al FEDER, al LIFE, al Green Infrastructure, al Social Fund del Mundial Bank? No sabemos, ellos tampoco lo saben. Y de hecho Tony Williams está trabajando mucho en ese. Y por último, también hay un problema que resolver, que es la formación. Esa formación de esos nuevos entes biónicos de mezcla de ADNs de distintas profesiones. Se tiene que adaptar también la formación, quizá universitaria sobre todo, pero hay que empezar desde pequeño. Y los cambios van muy a prisa. Los cambios van muy a prisa y no sé si para bien o para mal, pero nuestras instituciones universitarias son muy rígidas, tremendamente rígidas. Yo casi diría que son la antítesis de la resiliencia. O sea, modificar algo en la universidad es terriblemente complicado. Primero por los papeleos, montones de agencias de cualificaciones, montones de administraciones, luego las administraciones internas, rectorados, claustros. Es muy difícil y lo sabe la gente que lo intenta. Pero incluso en lugares donde a lo mejor creemos que es más fácil montar un nuevo semestre, cambiar las cosas, también es difícil porque estas cosas cambian más a prisa incluso de lo que pueda cambiar la universidad más ágil del mundo. Y de hecho los grandes despachos, las grandes consultoras, están teniendo que reciclar a sus ingenieros y arquitectos para enseñarles, para empezar a trabajar de esta otra manera. Que por cierto, no sé si es por casualidad, pero la mayoría de ellas se dieron cuenta de estas maneras de trabajar cuando empezaron a tener paisajistas en sus filas. Pero bueno, yo creo que es lo que hay que hacer. Y creo que aquí, lo que habéis conseguido hasta ahora, todo este fantástico mundo de la arquitectura del paisaje y del paisajismo, creo que le falta esa pata. Yo creo que me gustaría que algún día tuviéramos aquí la Bienal y que algunos de sus actos, la propia Bienal, fuera organizada por la Escuela de Arquitectura y Arquitectura del Paisaje, porque al fin y al cabo estamos condenados a entendernos. No es una cuestión de coger y taparos una fachada, una cubierta o lo que sea, o talar un árbol para que se vea mejor una fachada. Es, como decía, otra manera de trabajar, otra manera de entenderlo, otra manera de abordar los problemas que son urgentes, que algunos de ellos son dramáticos. Esta mañana la responsable de Ecología, Urbanismo y Movilidad, que ya de por sí dice bastante de cómo ha cambiado los nombres hasta de las concejalías, hablaba de las miles de personas que mueren prematuramente por la contaminación. Todos los días vemos pequeños pueblos o grandes pueblos o pequeñas ciudades o grandes ciudades donde la gente va en un kayak de una casa a otra porque se les ha inundado. Tenemos que actuar, es urgente y solo lo podemos hacer en común. Yo creo que individualmente difícilmente resolveremos estos problemas. Y yo creo que como el futuro del paisaje es nuestro lema de estos días, yo creo que tenemos que empezar a construir ese futuro de la profesión. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a Catherine Moore, a Tony Williams y a Rafael Narbona por este por mostrarnos este escenario profesional y hacernos reflexionar un poco sobre el futuro que tenemos tanto como paisajistas como personas. A continuación, vamos a empezar ya con la presentación de los trabajos finalistas que están previstos para esta tarde. En primer lugar, vamos a tener la oportunidad de oír a los autores del trabajo River Forest Island de la ciudad de Changsha, Hunan, en China, que son Sean O'Malley y Xiao Zhen de SWA Group. Por favor, si podéis acercaros, os pido que le demos la bienvenida.
Buenas tardes. I am Sean O'Malley, and this is Xiao Zheng, of course, from SWA. It's a pleasure to be here in Barcelona. This is a wonderful city. I truly love this place. I like to say that being from Los Angeles, Xiao and I we're sister cities with Barcelona, I think. We share the same climate, right? We kind of have the same landscape because you brought that to us, so thank you very much for that. And your buildings are a little bit older, I think, but we have aging movie stars, so I think we're almost alike. So with that, I'd like to talk to you today, tell you a little story about, really about reconnecting a people to their river. And so, rivers are beautiful places, but they're not static. They change with the seasons. They have a rhythm all of their own. And within this rhythm exists different environments. Wetlands, for example. It's these places that accept that seasonal change, both flooding and drought. It's also these places that are rich with life, these edges of the river. I like to say that the edges in nature are very important places. It's kind of where life truly exists. We find the richest amounts of life at the edges of coral reefs, the edges of meadows where they meet the forest, for example. It's where the predators hang out. Xiao?
But we have built our cities next to the rivers, and forgetting about these natural edges and forgetting about the rhythm of the river. And this is Xiang River, and the mother river of Changsha. And here's Changsha, a city in central China of 7 million people, and it's my hometown. And the city is along the river, and the Xiang River is a river of islands. And the island is the core. And when I was a child, people engaged with the river in a very different way, physically and culturally. We swam in the river, we met friends and family there, we play along the riverfront, and the river is part of our island, is part of our life. But things have been changed. And many islands, along this island, actually, along this river, 15 islands are under greater threat of flooding, erosion, and the loss of habitat. And today, we will look into one of these islands as a pilot project and another way to envision this important resource. This is Tangerine Island in the center of Changsha. It was built and rebuilt a few years ago. And as a response to the increased threat, this project took a very defensive way and built a wall around the river, and ignoring the rhythm of the river and block people's access to the river. And Changsha is the Chairman Mao's hometown. He used to swim in the river, and you can see he's right there, and be safely guarded by the concrete bank. And we heading south from Chairman Mao to the River Forest Island. It's 3.5 kilometers long, and it's shaped by the river current. On the east bank, the flow is very fast, so cause a lot of erosion, very severe erosion. But on the other side, the water flow is much slower, so it leading to deposition and the wetland creation. So this island has 3 major challenges on site, including erosion, seasonal flooding, and the lack of biodiversity due to the man-made nursery on site.
And so in nature, the river shapes the island. So I think that we're going to try and do the same thing, basically. And we've developed some design strategies. There we go. Okay, perfect. And architect, it's a tool I think we all should learn and know how to utilize effectively. Next, we really wanted to strengthen the edge in a way that was not hard, like Chairman Mao's island, but in a softer kind of a way. And also establish vegetation so that we not only, it's a strategy to kind of strengthen that edge and limit the erosion, but also, of course, to provide habitat. And then finally, to incorporate a program, because after all, this is supposed to be a central park for the city of Changsha, and we have to incorporate a place for people. And so the shaping of that land was extremely important. And on the left-hand side, you see a diagram that shows basically what happens 300 days of the year, most of the year. And on the far right, 2 days a year. And that water would fluctuate as much as 6 meters. I think we heard that earlier this morning, a similar kind of fluctuation in this river. And so the key was really to allow that water to coexist with the island, to allow that water into the island, and direct it and let it pass through, up and over. And to do that, we started with, on the far left, you see the existing topography. The red zone is kind of the higher grades. And then in the middle, our proposed topography, which really works with the northern part of the island, which is the highest part, to incorporate some building type programs, pavilions and so forth at those high points, and then also a little bit in the south. But the key was the diagram on the far right was a balanced cut and fill. We worked a lot with the local engineers, and they didn't want us to do anything that would impact the carrying capacity of the river. So a balanced cut and fill would not impact that carrying capacity. And so the river then shapes the island to 3 different landforms. The wetland buffer at the tip, you see here at the bottom, and then a terraced edge in the central there, which is, again, the wetland terraces, kind of a softer approach. And then the forest, you see the highland forest at the high ground at the top.
So based upon the adjacent water flow velocity, 2 strategies of stabilization are developed. At the west bank, low river velocity allows a softer edge, but on the other side, the east bank, in order to protect the island and against the high velocity, we designed a more terraced edge with submerged low walls and engineered reinforced slope. So by doing so, the river forest island only spent 1/7 of the cost of the other island with Chairman Mao. And for planting design, elevation defines the plant community. It is sensitive to fluctuation of the river, the local soil type, habitat diversity. Basically, we chose different plants for different plants at different elevations. And for example, the Phragmites is a very tough local river plant. We planted them at the lower level of the wetland areas because if it's a very strong root system and it helps to stabilize the edge of the island. And a diverse native trees palette is also used to restore the ecology of the island. Overall, we used about 20,000 trees. Metasequoia, this is a local tree, very common in Changsha. It's the main tree through the island, which can adapt to dry season and the flooding seasons. And the native ginkgos, camphor, salix, bamboo are used at the higher grounds. And the tree layout also reflects the landform, reflect the flow of the river. And this is the refined tree plan for construction. We actually reviewed this with a local design institute and made many adjustments and get to this point. And the island is also designed for people. A hierarchy of road, trails, boardwalks leads to the visitors through a journey of discovery. Overall, we have about 20 kilometers long trails. Visitors will explore fishing areas, observation decks, meditation gardens, wetlands, and facilitators.
Okay, now to the what I like to call the second half of the design process, which is the construction. Drawings can only go so far, so I can't stress enough. I mean, Xiao and I have a little bit of experience working overseas, and working face to face cannot replace a WebEx at all. So we had about 15 site visits here.
Right.
And I would like to say this was both the worst of times and the best of times.
And also very challenging time.
That's right, exactly. These guys were great, the local contractors. An educational process, we worked back and forth. I say the worst of times because we had a lot of arguments and a lot of, decisions to make when materials would change and so forth that were not on the drawings, and things would just appear randomly, rocks in places. So we had to work with that and compromise. The best of times because we worked it out over a beer at the end of the day. So that was 15 times to drink beer with them, so that was great. So that was fun. And I mentioned about the landform, and the whole site, really, we had to rework that soil to get it in the right locations, the teardrop forms that you saw. And I'm an Irishman, so I like getting my hands dirty. As you know, we like to dig ditches. I have dirt under my fingernails from working in my yard over the weekend, actually. So I love this part here. I wish I could be moving that tractor. And we planted lots of trees. Xiao mentioned over 20,000 trees. And these are the metasequoias that are really forming the backbone, the center part of the island. Again, we chose this tree for its adaptability and survivability. Although they told us at the start that these trees at this size, they have a very low survival rate, maybe about 60 to 50%. But we worked with the local university and the botanists, and they attached these IVs that each tree has here, this little drip IV to help it along, some extra carbon or sugars in its transportation process, and we achieved a 90% survival rate, and it was the highest they've ever seen for this tree, so the government was very happy about that.
Right. And during the construction, the island experienced 2 major floods, and that actually tested our design. And we also learned a lot from the flooding and learned from the dynamic nature. It's not just about the drawings, we really experienced this. So we actually made a lot of adjustment on site. For example, we use much more deeper rooted plants along the edge for this river, very strong river flow. And this is a construction photo. This is the transitional area. Metasequoia trees were planted on the small mini islands. So the water are allowed to come in during flood season. This is another construction photo. There's a major inner channel. It's created to help to dissipate water flow at a high level, at a very severe flood.
So River Forest Island really becomes, we hope, a new central park in the heart of Changsha, a pilot project, as Xiao mentioned, with an ecologically centered approach. And this variable grading, I think, makes the flood fluctuation no longer a threat, inviting that water into the island, offering opportunities for increasing biodiversity. And this image, I think, shows the south wetland in the summer with a high water level.
And here you can see the inner channel and the bamboo forest. And the tear-shaped landform actually allows water flow through or over. And at the right-hand side, the cafe is located at a higher ground. And this is a photo took this summer. And actually, every summer, this island will experience very severe floods like this. And actually, this is not the worst condition. During the worst condition, a lot more areas is going to be underwater. And in this photo, you can see while the South Welland is submerged underwater, but the central area, the park, still functions very well.
So the native metasequoia you see here, the salix and the ginkgo trees, help prevent the soil erosion. It provides habitat again to various mammals and amphibians. And these trees help to stabilize, of course, the soil, form the backbone from which we carved out a series of meadows and gardens. And including seasonal changes were considered to maximize the value for the ecosystem and the people. And here's a shot of the ginkgo trees in the fall, I believe. Okay.
At the South Welland, it contains a blend of smaller Welland islands and peninsulars that act as a protection, a buffer to the whole island. And it's linked by a meandering boardwalk system. And these Welland areas also have smaller channels, which helps to increase habitat diversity. And this is a winter shot. And the existing West Bank has a lot of existing wetlands, so we preserve them and also extend with additional wetland terraces and the slopes. And the trails connects to the boat dock, allows the river, the island accessible for the whole year round, and also connects people to the river. And the extensive trail system made the island a place for all kinds of users in varying environments, including more naturalized area, which is compared to the 7 million people urban city. And the wooden logs found on site were recycled as bird perches, which are going to provide resting areas for local and migrating birds. Many native plants allocated according to their water resilience and ability and the functions in purification and habitat establishment. It also engage with people's the trails. Trails and boardwalks leads the visitor through a meandering journey of discovery. And the trees and the wetlands are designed to create large flowing spaces and maximize viewing potential along the riverfront. And this is the central forest walk with a hierarchy of loops for casual strollers and avid hikers. And this is a wood dragon garden, a blend of wood timber and the stone, taking the visitors through a sculpture story. And the wood beams from old warehouse on site are also recycled in this garden. And the interpretation center is at the center of the island, also tells the history of this ancient river city and its river ecology system. It also incorporates with local schools programs and classes.
And so a series of gardens, plazas, recreation, education centers are spread throughout the higher land here. And the island playground has truly become a destination for local families. And play equipments are adapted for different age groups, including older folks. And also some naturalized areas, I think, that are wonderful places of escape from the city, including where this place where local farmers got involved. And they were allowed to actually manage this area, which is a canola plant, which attracts local people in the spring, a nice bloomer. And we had some inner ponds that we included in the island to create some diverse habitat again, and intermingled with boulders and so forth, to provide foraging, nesting, rearing habitat. And overall, I think we hope that The people have embraced the island, and we think that the island, in turn, has embraced the river. So with that, Xiao, I think we're going to show a little video. Right?
Before that, we're going to show a short video of the island. The videos took around August. It's about 2 or 3 weeks after a very severe flood. It's one of the most worst. And it was a kind of a test for us to see how the plants are recovering and how the edge works after the flood. And it happened to be, August is a very bad day. It happened to be a very hot day, so you won't be able to see a whole lot of people there. But let's take a look, see how this island doing after the flood.
Gracias.
El siguiente trabajo que vamos a ver esta tarde se ha realizado en la ciudad de Bangkok, en Tailandia. El trabajo lleva por título Bangkok Urban Reforestation y lo presenta Tawachai Kopkaikit de LAB.
Thank you very much for having us to the presentation tonight. And our project is different than the projects previously presented. The major goal for this project is not for us as a human, it's for the plants. And it's a laboratory for eco-forest scientists to test the idea of how we can plant these plants, native plants in Bangkok, in an urban area. what I like to talk about is the cause why we have to do the reforestation, and about the project itself and the inspiration that it may create. This is the image of the forest in Thailand, a tropical forest, and it has a lot of plants, animals, any living organism, and it's a source of our cultural identities. If you remember, or if you can think of the Thai traditional house, we started to use from the roof to the foundations, and it's also the source of our Thai food ingredients. And on the left-hand side, this is the image by the end of 19th centuries. Thailand was covered roughly about 70% of the countries by forest. And with the population growth and the needs for farmlands, just 100 years later, the amount of forest reduced drastically, almost 50% to 25%. And by the end of the 20th century, the government shut down all these lumbers and the timber business. They canceled all the license. And since then, the amount of forest has picked up 70%. And until now, we have about 30%, 32% of the forest in Thailand. You can see that the loss that we have, this is at the headwater of watershed that's destroyed, has been destroyed in Nan province. And you can see from the first image that I show, and now this is the image that you see. And by the end of the last centuries, like the last decade of 1990s, the government started to do reforestation projects. They pick up some lands that is left, like this one from the shrimp farms, and the government took over and tried to do the reforestation. And the result, this is from the perspective of when you walk there, and this is how they achieve it within 20 years. From the perspective, once you are inside, it's the monoculture reforestation, and the biodiversity is really rare. And the growth of the forest seem not to be at the height of the natural process. That's why there has been changes in terms of theories. And now more eco-forest has been regenerated rather than the monoculture, like what you see here. And the spacing that they use mainly for timber business now become more biodiversities. And that's the start of our projects. This, the Metro Forest projects. The project is located in Bangkok. It's on the periphery of Bangkok, on the east side, near Suvarnabhumi Airport. Roughly, it's about 30 kilometers from commercial CBD, and about less than 10 kilometers from the Suvarnabhumi Airport. And the site is roughly surrounded by low-density housings, and the size is around 1.92 hectares, or around 3 football fields. There are 4 lanes of road in front of the site, and there's not much development on the north side and the south side. About the program, the site was used as a dumping site for the local neighborhoods, and because it's just empty, this site used to be a lowland site where the previous owner has dug out the soil and sold it to other development nearby. And they left the site roughly 2.5 meters below the natural grade, and the whole site became just a swamp. The owner of the project, there is a company called PTT. It's publicly owned, but it's partly the government company. And they sell petroleum, and they produce petroleums. And this is one of their initiatives to build forests. And they have been building forests within the past 20 years, but on someone else's land, mostly the government land. This is the land that they own. And the requirement is that they want the whole space to be a laboratory for planting techniques that they have been acquired, and they don't want to use a lot of space for any other activities besides the maybe for water that is required, and the for multi-purpose spaces. This is the site plan of the project. The project is pretty small, as I said. It's, this is the main entrance, and roughly 75% of the land area devoted to planting. There is one building that the rooftop is a green roof, and a walkway. Visitor will not be allowed to walk freely. They have to walk in a guided, they call skywalk, and then going to this observation tower, and then coming down, and that's it. And the walk is only 200 meters, and there's a service road around the site, and once you pass by the site, actually you cannot see what's inside. It's just all planting area. The site that we were working on, the owner required that we have to use the technique developed by a Japanese ecological forest, Dr. Akira Miyawaki. And he has been developing his technique for over the past 20 years. And this shows his technique at the Yokohama National Universities. It's a technique that uses a specific, really engineered planting soil. And the way that we have to use native plants, and we cannot use some foreign species. And the technique of the plantings is required that it has to be from seedling, around like 50 to 80 centimeters, to promote natural selections. And the density of the plants that we have to do around 3 to 4 seeding per square meters. In this site alone, around 1.92 hectares, we planted roughly 60,000 seedlings. And this is the kind of idea that we initiated, that Once we plant all those seedlings, within 30 years, it will become a forest. That is the test that we are looking for. And the project has been done for the past 3 years now. And we are waiting for another roughly 25 years to see whether our guess will be correct. And within these projects, we rely heavily on nature. One, we use the same technique by Dr. Akira Miyawaki. And then we just let nature control herself. And we select the native plants. We plant them according to his theories. And then we hope that by the end of 30 years, we'll get that result. But we also have to help nature a little bit. We have to provide enough source of nutrient, water, and so we have to do engineering berms all over the site, and we have to dig some area to create water body, and the water body will flow into these berms and to make it moist enough, and so maybe we don't have to do a lot of irrigations, because in Thailand the raining season is roughly 6 to 7 months a year. And the reason that we did these berms around the site is not only to provide a lot of nutrients, but we also work with the visual effects, because the site is flat, and so we have to create a more solitude atmosphere once one enters into the site. We also do collect a lot of waters and try to disperse them according to our strategy. And this is the main entrance to the building. The building functions for two activities. One is for scientists to work in this building to collect data, to collect how plants grow, to collect microclimate, how the climate change if we plant, and a lot of data that I don't really understand them. And another part is the information is become the information centers. Once visitors come to this building, they learn a little bit of the process of building this forest. And we chose the, we work with the architects. Her office called Space Time, and we work with her to pick up the materials of the projects, of the buildings, because the soil is so important for the plants, for the forest. And we would like the visitors to understand it, this method, this idea, once they enter to the building. And once they walk around that curved wall, and they enter to this more or less like a natural features. And one can see that there is a tower here. And right now, this rainy season in Thailand, and we barely see any columns now. It's been only like 2 years after this project completed. According to the eco-forest design theories, seedlings are usually grown atop berms with soil mix of high qualities, approximately 60 centimeters. But for these projects, we use 1 meter of soil depth to create more nutrients, and also to create the visual effect that we want to. And visitor can only walk on the skywalk that within the first few years, it will be a skywalk. because visitor will walk almost over the trees. But right now, before I came here, I went there, we just be able to touch some leaf, and it's become more like a canopy walk. And the visitors will experience the growing of the natures and the growing of the forest as well. Along the edge, basic practice in Bangkok that once you want to have this kind of water body, they will use lining. But for these projects, because we want to plant a lot of plants to simulate natural ecosystem along the edge, and so we ignored how to use the lining, and so we create a lot of water edge, and we also create some running water, like here, to help circulate the water. In the site, in addition to various challenges at each stage to the construction of the site, we have to help the construction team to plant heavily before, and the most difficult challenge of the designer was the testing of planting design in the landscape design, because there were 270 species that we were given by the scientists that we have to use them because they are native to the Bangkok area. And so as regular landscape architecture in Thailand, they involve a lot of transplant, and but these projects, we don't use a lot of them. We try to use a lot of our planting techniques, try to come up with the way to organize those 270 species to make them look beautiful, because if they don't, maybe when people come and they don't remember this technique. And we also open up their mind that the natural process of planting design may be more beautiful than the traditional techniques that we use. You can see now that this is from the whole site, from the observation tower. The observation tower is 23 meters in height, and it sits on top of an island. We use a lot of recycle in this project. This is from the railroad ties, and the projects got the LEED Platinum for the whole development. And we also provided some activities, and these may be the only activities that visitor can enjoy. On top of the buildings, there are green roof. The green roof was designed to help with the stormwater runoff and serve as insulation for the building. The designer intended it to be low maintenance, and thus provided shrubs that are native, annuals, and perennials. The construction of the projects. Since the projects, this is the first month of the site, and this is actually prior to any construction. And we started to move the earthwork around, and at the third month, it's the soil mix productions for engineered soil. And this is the fourth month, the 5th and the 6th month. And that is the first test berms that we did. This one, we did it at the beginning of the 7th month and try to let them grow. And after roughly 1.5 years, after we tested that the idea worked, we started other process of building the skywalk, and building the observation tower. You can see that. And with this result, it has been a really good result. And the project was designed to be attended only by a handful of people, maybe 100 people per day at most. And when we decided, we thought about only 60 people because we didn't know that there would be a lot of people wanted to see this forest. And we thought that it's only for specific people who wanted to see some data and want to see those kind of technique, maybe more like a professional. But the project has been really good in terms of attendance. A lot of kids loved it, and a lot of people see these new kind of techniques, and they want to see more of these kind of projects. And even Boy Scouts comes. And that's why once I see this, I thought that maybe from the past that we developed our countries, like by the end of 19th centuries, we had 70% of forests, and now we have roughly 30% of forests. Maybe this kind of generation, these kids, they probably would be able to help us, to help Thailand, to go back to the countries where the forest is abundant and where the natural processes cannot be ignored, and the natural processes will have to work with us, with development, with humans, to bring us to next level where we probably would consume less, and we probably would depend on our hands less, and we probably will depend on the nature more. And these kids probably will be our hope that eventually will go through this phase of Thailand where there's a lot of projects that want to do this. Right now in our office, we have been approached by different group of people, from private residents to communities, to housing projects, and even industrial, to do these kind of projects in their land, which I think is a good sign. People understand this more, and people want it more. And maybe, eventually, by the end of maybe these centuries, Thailand will be back to normal, as we would love to. Thank you very much.
A continuació farem un descans i ens tornem a trobar aquí a les 5:10. Ara. Sisplau, perdó. Sisplau, aneu seient, que començarem la sessió, aquesta segona part de la sessió de la tarda. Por favor, iros sentando que vamos a empezar la sesión de la tarde. Bona tarda de nou. Continuarem la sessió de presentació de projectes finalistes al Premi de Rosa Barba de Paisatge amb la presentació de Mary Margaret Jones de Hargreaves Associated del projecte Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park de Londres del Regne Unit. Sisplau, Mary Margaret. Donem la benvinguda.
Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to be here. I know it's the end of an afternoon and there's just me and one more before you get to have that cocktail. So my last time, I love Barcelona. My last time in Barcelona was to look at the post-Olympic sites around the city when we were beginning our work on the Sydney Olympics. So it's great to be back, and it's maybe perhaps poetic that I'm back and talking about another Olympic site to which we put some of what we learned when we visited Barcelona. In our work, we've developed an approach to placemaking that layers history, ecology, and environmental phenomena to create meaning through dynamic, interactive, and exultant landscapes. Whether these landscapes are reductive or rich, highly programmed or passive, culturally interpretive or teeming with natural phenomena, our built landscapes seek a power of connection to our day-to-day lives, melding site sustainability and memorability. The Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park is the first large park built in England in 150 years. So we had this responsibility to look at the history of these amazing parks that were the hunting grounds of the nobility turned to pleasure gardens before that 150-year gap. But we also had the responsibility to think about what parks can be today, with the technology that we know now, with what we know now about the environment, to create a park for the 21st century. So, we were given a site. The site is in East London, as is so often the case, not always the case, but so often the case with Olympics. It's not in the heart of the city. It's outside of the heart of the city. In this case, East London, near Stratford. This is an area historically known for gritty industry, dense population, poverty, crime, and disease. Imagine Jack the Ripper. This is, in fact, where those murders happened. It's in a river valley. Running through this site is the River Lee, now surrounded by residential areas. It's a brownfield site. And the site of the Olympics is almost 500 acres, 100 hectares. And then the park within that is 274 acres. The site was characterized by rail yards, industrial fields, and a channelized river. When we were brought on, the site was already slightly under construction, as you see here. You can see mostly the clearing and land work done for the stadium, the big monster. And we were brought in because a master plan had been done. But our client, the late John Hopkins in particular, with the Olympic Delivery Authority, realized that you shouldn't build a master plan. You need to build a design. So he called us in with little time, just like our work on the Sydney Olympics, to salvage a design out of a master plan, to create a place for what would be the greenest games that would actually speak to that and become a place that the world would remember. So you see these kinds of conditions of the river in the North Park, steep banks, in the South Park, actual walled river conditions. And this was a diagram, a very simplified diagram of the master plan that they were building from, that our first task was to analyze. And the first thing we saw when we looked at this was that it looked to us like a lot of paving. And we thought perhaps some redundant paving. And the river sort of choked between. So the first thing we did, we used our experience from the Sydney Olympics, knowing how Olympic sites work, and the data we got from the transit authorities and the planned transit facilities to understand how people would arrive on the site and how they would move through the site. So we analyzed the flow of people and came to this kind of diagram of mapping of intensities and numbers of people. And then proposed this diagram, this very simple diagram instead. So this was we had to hit the ground running, they were building, and we knew there were problems. Now this paving reduction allowed a number of things. The park is foreground, the river is revealed, and paving is reduced. Now you might also notice that means that bridges over the river would have to get longer, more expensive. So it was important for us to prove that the reduction of paving would help offset the cost of making longer bridges. We also could guarantee the balance of cut and fill on the site using such a method. So you see here for the North Park, the previous master plan, the steeper banks, more limited views of the river, as opposed to the lower section, which was our proposal, to lay the banks back, sculpt the banks, create places for people, places for habitat, and much better views of the river. And in the South Park, the same thing, to take what the master plan had proposed for steep banks and to step those banks in a more urban way for the South Park, but again, creating more access to the river, more views of the river, celebrating, in fact, the river. Now, the Olympics have a non-negotiable deadline, and we were, like I said, called in with not a lot of time because they were building it already. So we needed an interactive design process. We needed something highly flexible that would keep us nimble and keep us moving fast. So we started with this clay model, and this is the same clay model in both images that we built in our studio, and we began carving away at the river. So this idea of an expanded river was adopted. Now it was time to figure out what to do with that. So we just kept refining this clay model, and we used it to meet with the constituents, the stakeholders, the venue designers, our client, and even the contractors. And we arrived at this master plan, a master plan that used this pattern on the site to create a cohesive whole, a distinct North Park and South Park, the transit in a way intersecting the two. And we had to think about also what this would be post-games. So I'll come back to that. But it was important that we looked at the landscape for the games and the landscape post-games. So in the North Park, known as the Environmental Park, we were able to really sculpt the banks, lay them back, and create, as you see, a lot of habitat, a lot of places for new kinds of flora and fauna to thrive. And in fact, we were given goals. You must meet these goals for a certain number of habitats and a certain type of habitats. And those, that would then sponsor these kinds of biozones. So everything from wooded gullies to loggeries to meadows, but different kinds of meadows, to wet woodland, to upland woodland, et cetera. So thinking about grading as a sponsorship of biozones combined with water. And in fact, that we had to think of this landscape as being absorptive. An absorbent landscape was really imperative because there's a huge watershed that comes to this river. And by broadening the banks, by maximizing landscape, we were able to provide flood relief for a very large watershed to our north. And we thought of the North Park as a series of layered components. So they're integrated, of course, in the end to make form in place, but they are systems that are each independent. And so we analyzed each of these systems, building up from water through a circulation of people and other kinds of circulation needed on the site, to three-dimensional landforms, to plantings and lawns and terraces. So then putting it all together. In the South Park is the festival park. It's the real urban part of the Olympic site. It stretched for half a mile, again, over 100,000 plants, many species of trees and meadows, et cetera. All supported by non-potable irrigation, which ended up being sort of interesting because in the beginning, the irrigation to the plants was river water. And the river water was actually killing the plants, so they had to stop that until the whole system was put in place. And again, also in the South Park, this grading, this topography sponsors these biozones from wetlands to meadow to woodlands. And the gradient here, because the gradient is more dramatic, also informed what could be planted on these banks. The gardens are themed. We were nodding to this great British tradition of collecting plants from all over the world, as well as expressing these cultural geographies, these plant biozones, if you will, from the countries that come to participate in the games. So each of these gardens was themed. They didn't want to do an Olympic fountain, but they wanted to do Olympic gardens. So these are themed based on the countries who gather together. And the structure of these gardens was a real mixture of formal and informal. We wanted the wild and the formal mixed together. So starting at the top, you have these primary tree lines that are formal, then you have clusters of riparian trees, then super graphic hedges, then the gradient strips, because there's a lot of grade change, then low planting lawns, access and paving, and then composited to create a place. Throughout design development, while they were building, we used these did many of these kinds of axonometric drawings to study all these components that had to come together in such a three-dimensionally complex way. So we couldn't use traditional, we couldn't just draw and plan. And I want to say something about our responsibility as a profession, I think, to not just do great diagrams and plan, to not just do good environmental analysis, to not just make program work on a site, to not just create a place where there are things for everyone to do. We have to ultimately give form to these places. We have to be designers, and we have to make places that will be memorable. Okay, so construction. It's a big site. Even before we got started, they were cleaning up the site. So 1.5 million cubic yards of contaminated soil was made banal, and made banal by being cooked in huge trucks and then put back for us to play with. And lots of awful stuff was dredged from the river and the canals. So you see here, so what seemed fairly rapidly our clay model to becoming real in dirt and landscape and water on this site. You can see the way the landforms are sculpted, creating this balance of cut and fill, creating these sequence of moments, and at the same time creating a wetland environment as had once existed for this river. This sculpting of these landforms allowed us also to create places for people to gather in different ways. Someone told me that the best part of the games in their mind was that they were able to escape from the games, if you will, go down to the river, have a bottle of wine, because it's Great Britain, you could do that, and gather on these terraces and seating devices that we built into the banks. You can see in the lower, see the bridge, that's a pedestrian bridge, so the bridges were built twice as wide as needed ultimately, so half that bridge went away post-games. And of course, this sculpting of the riverbanks also was nodding to some of the great architecture that was happening at the top of the banks along the river on the promenade. This, of course, being the velodrome designed by Atkins, which I think was the best building on the site, and rightfully so. At the Beijing Olympics, that was Britain's only gold medal was in cycling. And this shows the construction of the wetlands in the river and the way that is done to create land out of what was water with this mesh of permeable fences, if you will. And to think about these sweeping arcs in the landscape, both in the South Gardens on your left with the super graphic hedges and with the landforms on the right and the velodrome in the background. And to think about the paving as something temporary in a way. So the image you see on the right, a lot of that paving went away post-games, so after 6 weeks of use or so. So we came up with a paving matrix that could actually be ground up post-games and used to create stony meadow habitat. Who knew there was stony meadow habitat, but it turned out to work perfectly. The benches creating another kind of super graphic on the site and enabling people to look in all directions, and then let the games begin. In the South Park, it was a place of celebration and a celebration of the gardens in particular, and these terraces that created ways of viewing the site, viewing the river. A great place for strolling and promenading. People loved the gardens. They came, they took notes, they took pictures, they studied the plant types, and it made a great setting for Kapoor's Orbit, which, by the way, now has a slide in it. And it was appealing to all ages of nature lovers and flower lovers. Gave places for people to sit in the shade on the banks, on the grassy banks. Here you see that contrast of wild and formal in the gardens. And a place for people to just really sort of hang out and escape. Whoops. And a real beacon at night. The gardens were lit. This is the North American garden, and people flocked to the landscape. The North Park, the environmental park, laid back here, and you see these sort of sequences of spaces. So you see these lawns, which post-games will be meadows for habitat, but you see how it's set within this matrix of a landscape system and this unfolding as you move down the river in this sequence of views. So in those lawns, they were able to do temporary performance facilities, or people were able to gather and watch the games on the big screens that were in the river. The gardens themselves, the landscape itself, invited participation. And even during the Paralympic Games, became a place for people to gather and celebrate and just chill out, frankly, so that one person could find respite in this landscape full of hundreds of thousands of people. And these tilted plains of grass became great places to view the games, but also gave you a real sense of being in a place within this natural landscape. And the loggeries and the other habitat that existed on the site did its job in terms of attracting back the frogs, etc. We worked with a specialist from the University of Sheffield in terms of the plants, and he actually got out there during construction and worked with the contractors, teaching them old school methods of laying seeds, throwing seeds, to create this beautiful landscape. So we were also hired to create the transformation plan. So post-games, this place that would be a legacy, that would be a park for many generations to come, sporting facilities, but also a place for people and wildlife. So the whole time we were doing our planning, we were also thinking about, after those really essentially 6 weeks, what would this become? So you see the two plans side by side. On the left, games mode, and on the right, transformation mode. First, the thing that strikes you immediately is a lot of that paving goes away. As I said before, it becomes stony meadow habitat. A lot of the venues are either removed, some are downsized. You may know the Olympic Stadium stays but gets smaller. Zaha Hadid's Natatorium Aquatic Center stayed but got smaller. They removed the wings that are there for the extremely high dives and the vast number of stands that aren't needed post-Olympics. Some of the venues go completely away, and some of them went to Rio. So there was a reuse of some of those structures for things like handball that happens. And then post-games, the competitive cycle track, again, cycling, performance areas, and more green space. So as we went through the planning process, we looked at games mode and transformation mode in each of the kinds of landscapes. And I think this is one of the things that really separates the British Games, the London Games, from many of the other Olympics. They weren't out to, well, they're British. They weren't out to wow. They were out to create something for the future. And that really was their almost #1 goal. And I love this before and after games mode, transformation mode, because you can hardly tell the difference. And that was the idea during games mode, to create this kind of environment that would then flourish in transformation mode. So we had to think about how you would connect this park to its surroundings. You can't just create it as an isolated island. You have to think about how it's sponsoring something beyond those 6 weeks. So we looked at connections of green corridors, roads, pedestrian ways, etc., to these neighborhoods, all of which were slightly suspicious of the games in one way or another, but ultimately, I think, changed. So we came up with this idea of stitches and fields. The stitches being these green corridors, these places of water management, these places of habitat corridors, and the fields being destinations, or other urban parks, smaller parks, informal spaces, the allotments, the allotment gardens, and food destinations, which would then maximize ecological potential of the parklands, which would then maximize development potential to interface with those parklands. So we were creating value for the long run, in many ways, economic, ecological, etc. And then we got down to a very detailed level of studying some of those connections, in particular the parking and the access for the velodrome. So this was a kind of interesting challenge to us. We had to design a landscape that would all be, it was sort of simultaneity of events. So everything had to come together for the 2012 games. Everything had to work. Everything had to bloom. Everything had to look good. It all had to work at that moment. But then we had to set in place a landscape that would evolve so that it would unfurl and over time mature and change, and the systems would be developed in a natural way over time. So it was interesting, it was a challenge, and ultimately really gratifying. So I think that for us, it was really exciting to create this venue for such a celebrated event and to see the transformation of a river. But for us, I think it was just as exciting to think about the place that we'd be creating for many generations to come, and that would really be setting something bigger than itself in motion. So with that, maybe I could point to some of our team members I'd like to thank, and thank you.
Para finalizar la presentación de los trabajos finalistas, vamos a dar la bienvenida a Catherine Mosbach, de Mosbach Paysagist, y nos va a presentar el trabajo Musée par Louvre-Lens de la ciudad Nord-Pas de Calais, en Francia. Muchas gracias.
Good afternoon. So I feel it's a very strong day for landscape architecture, so I'm pleased to introduce you some thoughts about tomorrow landscapes and a future past. Minus 100 million years, outcrops of salt deposited in a closed sea. Only sign life are cyanobacteria practicing photosynthesis. Minus 240 million years, supercontinent Pangea. Recently, Alan Nutman from Wollongong University, Australian, found in a metamorphic rocks informing Isua in Groenland conical limestone structure named stromatolith, built layer by cyanobacteria. If that hypothesis is validated, the emergence of life would be advanced from 220 million years, and all hopes are to find life on planet Mars. Breakdown of Pangea, fragmentation into land masses, new land masses, continental drift, stromatolith in Australian, continental morphing. Distension of the African continental crust engaged a rifting with the opening of the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. The Jebel Faya, the most ancient settlement of human being, takes place there in the mountain of Al-Hasha. Persian Gulf is dry. Tigris and Euphrates rivers create oases and thus the wettest green and fertile area of Arabian Peninsula. Persian Gulf is flooded due to the melting of the last glacial period. That means that the green and fertile area goes down until a lot of layers and introducing the oil process. On the other extremity of scale, that's a zoom on our skin bodies showing the continued exchanges between inside and outside our bodies. Means that landscape design engage the wellness and the sameness between exchanges from inside and outside our bodies, but not only between qualities links between many bodies each others, and between human beings in connected with our planet and in the future with other planets. Means our design process is very deeply engaged on the educational level so that the inhabitants understand their responsibility connected to our planets. The Louvre Lens terrain takes place in between, vast and tight. On the Louvre Lens territories, the soil deposit comes from the mine exploitation, vertical when happens the electricity, or horizontal rebut, in our case, inert soil exposed on sun, rain, visitors. The cyanobacteria, the same as those 3.7 billion years ago, engage the slow and safe biological process. That visual comes from 2006. The Museum Park highlights the intermingling between art and time. It is a standing point to highlight the plasticity of transformation and production from human being, objects, and territories, exposed to interwoven layers of several time spans. The short time span of production, which traits and commands the shaping and settling from everyday life. The long time span of accumulation, which transforms everything, even as if perpetuates its memory. The initiation of the Museum Park on one of the pit heads engages the capacity to change over from the economic production to an economy regenerated by a way of inhabiting and revisiting the memories of an area in contact with the memories of art and cultures in the broad sense. At 4 cardinal points, the terrain is joined to the territories on several kilometers by what remains of the Cavalier rider seams, network of raised roads, excavated earths from the transport of material by rail from the railway station and ports, the elongated footprint of the distribution method of industrial flows deflected the manner of installing itself in the ground plate. The abandoned rails were the premier niches of vegetable colonization that in 20 years of abandonment have engaged a pioneer forest to the west and environmental corridors between fragmented and controlled territories by the mines of the hold of the border Cavalier. This project addresses the question of compartmentalization and decompartmentalization, what remains to the realm of art, architecture, landscape, economic, and history. The project invests a mesh of connected platforms and alleys, ripe for contemporary urban development 4,000 square kilometers. Were it not for the fact it masks an underlying social compartmentalization built into people's minds rooted in the land use structure of mining countries. It is then a question of articulation through this program, the vegetable dynamic that primed the attractivity of the terrain, the cultural dynamic with the museum itself, the event platform, the soft ties of Cavalier, and the living memories of the mining base of the cycle of plant materials to valued oils as an economic resource, then, in an inverted symmetry of the oil of the valued plant as heritage resource. As such, the Museum Park irrigates the country in depths, the same as the garden cities, so singular are all naturally brought to the threshold of the museum. The concept of ongoing transformation is a key assumption of our design process, summarized by a simplified directory. The soil is alive, with a continual process of gas exchanges, more or less visible. In the depths or on the skin, the capacity of exchanges are main concerns of transfiguration. In the manner of streets of microorganisms who fix the atmospheric nitrogen in order to transform it into nitric nitrogen, the ground is perforated with pockets of draining stones, mineral storage, are the same as clusters of drops that capture water, retain it, infiltrate it in the water table. The sky morphing is the main parameter in this process, as the emptiness of the clearing makes the air condensation visible from far and from near. The perception is never fixed on stable stages, as air is charged on seeds and many bacteria. A simple path becomes a pond or a river. The project process moves here, replace transport of natural resources, conglomerate in cultural resources, to a transhumance transmuted into ideas and materials in contact with the elements. Authorized work by primary plans is the main step of maintaining alive a landscape typology. That's visual from 2014. Involved by those partitions, visitors become figures passing through the places. That project outlines brow inside and out, from a stock of deposit materials open to coarse populations as work time, plants, cycle producing on real time, work in progress of landscape and inhabitant. The traveling parade at the same time gardens and visitor services. Beside walkway rather fast, a beam path invited the free wanderings rather slow from gardens to event platforms. Playing that partition means dissolving the limit between nature and culture, between park and architecture, mineral and vegetal, between housing and facilities. The concept of open flows and traveling emphasizes the combination of architecture and landscape, of art and nature, as a unique pieces taking place in a vast territorial mesh. It engaged an evolving formation formed over time from underground stratification combined with economical energy exploration and emotional reception by installing the figure of the facility in the depths of the earthwork, combining human being with plant and earth happenings. The regular perforation of mineral surfaces by holes and recessed joints around the foyer, main entrance of the museum, allows for an articulated transition from blossoming prairie clearings to the mineral surfaces around the built part by identifying towards a level of the land formation and in order to finish in the pioneer forest. This perforation will be the favorite substrate of mosses, which have the ability to capture and to fix heavy metals to the soils and actually to reduce the ambient dust. The park restores the disturbed link between skin, recording surface, and depth, resource of yesterday and tomorrow. It opens the door to future ages by introducing the arts as mediators of all the ages and as bridges to new mentalities. The park outlines the challenges of a programmatic content, trigger of active memory, the space strategy of a cultural facility, park museum, and potential landscape event extended Louvre galleries. Each of these strata is represented by the temporal dimension to which it pertains. The Louvre gardens materialize at their intersection like so many extracts of a living memories. The content of educational is a very important scope here, not only because of the contact of the art pieces, but because of the economically very dramatic situation of the region, means that there is a place where the people and the children can find a way to learn from each other. The mine pit, much more traditional activities. When an institution like the Louvre positions itself on this soil and by extension in this area, it offers a striking opportunity. We are talking about types of encounter between these two universes that seem at first sight to be disparate and yet draw from the same resources what is commonly known as culture. Art on the one hand and an industrial and landscape culture on the other. Here the project is enacted through withdrawal subtraction in order perhaps to protect meaning, cultivate its inexhaustible store so that it reveals itself in its multiple layers available to the visitors who wish to probe it. Back to human scales. Like Eisenstein, I would propose to open landscape to the outside world, the side of history, the side of politics, but also deepen the landscape to something as an inner world, the side of the unconscious, the side of desire. By coexisting in the same work, the dizziness, the close, detail, atoms, and the vertical, distant atmospheres, flows. Tomorrow landscape has to be worked as transgression, never reclosing frames and forces. So I will introduce some comments from Alain Fleischer, a movie maker and multidisciplinarity artist.
Le décor est planté, si l'on peut dire, et les chemins sont tracés. Contrairement au musée Guggenheim de Bilbao, le Louvre-Lens n'est pas érigé au centre de la ville. D'ailleurs, il ne s'érige pas, il se déploie. Il dépose sur la terre ses dominos de verre et de métal plats, ne créant aucun effet de surplomb. Le bâtiment ne prétend pas reconfigurer la ville autour de lui. Par des chemins qui partent de la gare, il attire à lui dans une promenade, à la découverte du paysage. Il faut s'éloigner de la densité urbaine pour approcher une autre densité, celle de l'art et de son histoire, plusieurs fois millénaire. Dans le ciel, le temps maintenant s'accélère, poussant le jour vers une nuit de fête. Les formes dans le ciel de nuit ont laissé la place au matin à d'autres formes inscrites sur le sol. On découvre les dessins du jardin. Premier été au Louvre-Lens. Les couleurs du jardin ont commencé à en remplir le dessin. C'est tout un réseau de chemins fantaisistes, irréguliers, émancipés de la géométrie comme élastiques, qui conduisent à travers le parc jusqu'au bâtiment d'une géométrie rigoureusement orthogonale. Le bâti et le planté jouent l'un avec l'autre et s'amusent de leurs différences. On comprend que c'est en effet en contraste avec la liberté ludique de la surface où il est posé que le bâtiment s'inscrit comme un signe pur qui, lui, obéit à la règle. Il y a le jeu, il y a la règle, l'un a besoin de l'autre, c'est la règle du jeu. Si le bâtiment du Louvre-Lens ne prétend à aucun surplomb, c'est en le surplombant, en le survolant, que peut se contempler son implantation dans le territoire, la marque qu'il imprime sur le tissu urbain. La signature des architectes, tout imprégnée de leur culture et de leur tradition japonaise, est comme entourée, décorée par l'écriture d'une paysagiste française qui aime jouer avec l'inspiration venue de divers registres, de diverses pratiques de l'art contemporain. La tache, la coulure, la dégoulinure, le dessin aléatoire, l'anamorphose, la transgression des limites, la perversion du cadre, le labyrinthe. En prenant un peu de distance par rapport au lieu de présentation des grands chefs-d'œuvre du passé, comme par modestie, dans cette extrémité du site en lisière avec le retour à la nature, le parc devient parc de sculpture in situ, ou plutôt une œuvre contemporaine du land art. Mais certains matériaux, piquets, planches, poutres et madriers, disposés au sol ou dressés vers le ciel, rappellent que dans les profondeurs du sous-sol, ils servirent à consolider les galeries de mines. L'œuvre la plus immense, la plus impensable, la plus irreprésentable, la plus émouvante, est peut-être là, au fond de la terre, à jamais invisible.
Bé, per acabar, volem agrair des dels membres del Comitè Científic de la Biennal a tots els finalistes per aquests magnífics treballs, per aquestes presentacions de les quals segurament tots aprendrem moltíssim a partir d'ara en els nostres treballs, i també del rigor en mantenir el temps que se'ls ha donat per fer la presentació, que això ha ajudat moltíssim a que el dia hagi anat molt fluid i hagi sigut molt agradable des de primera hora del matí fins a última hora de la tarda. Moltes gràcies. El jurat també pensem que ara els hi queda la feina de decidir i l'únic que podem dir és que tinguin una bona feina. I a tots vosaltres també recordar-vos que ara a continuació, a les 7 de la tarda, hi ha la inauguració de les exposicions, com us hem dit al començament, les exposicions de tots els projectes que s'han presentat al Premi Internacional Rosa Barba de Paisatge, que podreu veure a les sales d'exposició del Col·legi d'Arquitectes, que està a davant de la catedral. També allà farem avui la inauguració de l'exposició de les escoles de paisatge, dels treballs de les escoles de paisatge, que en aquest cas estan en el hall de l'Escola d'Arquitectura de Barcelona. Res més, moltes gràcies i ens veiem d'aquí una estona. Bona tarda.